What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Sports Talk with Tyson the Trainer. So in today's video, I kind of wanted to go back a little bit and just reiterating something that I talked about a while ago, and just in regards to energy systems, just because I don't think I explained myself correctly or as in depth as I could have when it comes to energy systems, and because I want to make sure that you guys have a full understanding about what's going on. So I thought I'd just remake this video so you guys can obviously. It's not exactly wrong in regards to the other video, like there's still obviously takeaway points and stuff like that, but it's like just so you can get a better understanding of energy systems overall and kind of how they're utilized in the body, right? So basically, as I said before, you know, we kind of do have technically three energy systems that we have. We have the PCR, we have the glycolytic, and we have the oxidative system, right? And obviously these are always going to be used in different types of our training, or it would be like, you know, the anaerobic and aerobic system for the most part in the PCR system. So the thing that I kind of want to just kind of give you guys an idea with first is that ATP, right? So ATP is something that it's our body's currency of energy, okay? It's what we use to move, to walk, to talk, to do everything. That's our currency. So like, even though fat and carbohydrates and protein to a small amount can be used as fuel sources, yes, they're used as fuel sources, but it's to use, like it's the, I'm trying to think of how to explain this to you guys. It's the prerequisite to having, to producing ATP, and ATP is what's actually making us contract muscles, walk, talk, and do all those things, right? So ATP is our cell's currency, basically. And we need carbohydrates and fats to be able to make the ATP currency, right? So basically, we're always going to have stored ATP inside of us, and there's always going to be a certain amount that we're going to have no matter what. And so this is like really about 1 to 3 to 4 seconds of immediate ATP energy for use. So when you're going to sprint really quickly, as in like I'm just going to sprint down the whole way for the next 3 seconds, that's all my ATP depleted straight away from that side of things, okay? Then from there we start to move over to our PCR system, right? So our phosphocreatine system, which is going to be a little bit more of that sprint for a little bit longer, usually up to that 10 to 20 second mark. And then from there we go into our glycolytic system, okay? But when I'm saying and then, like kind of as we're transitioning, it's not like this switches on and then it turns off, and then this switches on and then it turns off, and then this switches on and then it turns off, and this switches on, okay? So this is what I don't want you to get confused about. Like, we're not going from one thing to another. We're always kind of on this spectrum of how it goes. So all systems are always going to be used, okay? Even with that 400 meter sprint or 300 meter sprint, whatever it's going to be, and you're using that PCR system, even though you're going to be sprinting, okay, you're still going to be using your anaerobic system and your oxidative system, all right? So you're going to be using everything during that whole time. It's just the degree that you use it, you know? So you used ATP immediately, then as you're coming to the PCR system, basically what's happening there is like, you know, your oxidative and your glycolytic system, or your anaerobic and your aerobic system are kind of like, this is zero, they're like sitting here, then as this go down, this comes up basically, okay? So it's just on a spectrum, or like, you know, it goes from high to low versus on to off is what I'm trying to explain here, you know? So we do have certain times where we were using predominantly a certain fuel source, you know, carbohydrates or fat based on the intensity, but it's never just one, okay? You're still going to use both, especially like doing your training, because the body just is always going to be utilizing that, because the way the ATP turns over in our body, right, the way we're always kind of regenerating our currency, our energy's fuel, it requires fat and carbohydrates for this system. And with fats, it takes longer to regenerate that fuel, and that's why there's still, you know, source of carbohydrates being used there, so you can regenerate the ATP faster, okay? So when this kind of gets put into action, you know, you've gone for a sprint, you're sprinting as hard as you can for the first 3 seconds, that's all your immediate ATP used. Then you've continued on that sprint for a little bit longer, let's say the next 10 to 15 seconds. You've then used that first PCR system, and then as it's kind of coming down and that glycolytic system is going up and it's still kind of being used, you are going to notice that as that intensity prolongs, you're not going to be able to maintain that full out sprint, you know? Your effort's going to be here, and then it's slowly coming down your intensity, because you can't maintain that same high threshold the whole way through, because we just can't regenerate ATP as fast as we can. And this is why our energy goes down, just because of that cycle of that ATP not being able to be regenerated as fast. And that's why we have the different systems, you know? Like when you're using your anaerobic system, you're doing sprints, you're doing interval trainings, you're doing things like that, you're predominantly using carbohydrates in the glycolytic system, because it'll be what's what I'm trying to think of here? It'll be regenerated quicker, all right? But you can't hold that intensity for as long. So your intensity will again slowly start to come down, and then like the oxidative and the fat burning, or using fat as a fuel source, becomes more of your energy source, just because you can't maintain that intensity, right? Now the cool thing is, the fitter you get, the more you're able to actually hold higher levels of intensity, and being able to use fat more predominantly as your fuel source. And the reason we want to be able to use fat more predominantly as our fuel source when we're doing certain things at higher intensities is because it's just it's a bigger fuel source. You know, it's a bigger tank overall. It's a hybrid versus a diesel. You know. Or it's like, you know, it's a hybrid versus, what am I trying to think of here? Like obviously a diesel, but a car that's used a lot of fuel really quickly based on where you guys live. I don't know what the fucking definition is going to be. But, you know, we have a more efficient car that's going to last longer versus something that just guzzles gas really quickly, you know? This may produce a lot of fucking power. This may not produce as much power, but it can go for longer, right? So when these energy systems are kind of going, you know, between each other, up and down, I guess you would say, and like, you know, you're using a percentage of this and you're using a percentage of that. When we go into that oxidative side of things, we're still using carbohydrates and fat as a fuel source, but that's when our intensity will kind of determine what we're using more of. So if you're having that higher intensity level, you're going to be using less fat as a fuel source, more carbohydrates, and then vice versa. As your intensity drops, you're going to be using more fat as a fuel source. So like this is where it's just to kind of give you guys an idea about, there's no like, it's not just one fuel source forever. And it's not just you're doing this and then we go to this and you're not using the same fuel source. And they're always kind of going up and down. And especially, you know, when doing certain exercises based on who you are as an athlete, you know, there will be times where your heart rate goes higher and you're getting close to that intense mark, where you will be using nearly just all carbohydrates, like a very high percentage of your carbohydrates. Then there'll be times where you're resting, where, you know, you're letting your energy restore, you're catching your breath, you're getting oxygen back in your body, because oxygen, the more, you know, when you're resting, you want to actually make sure you're standing up and getting as much oxygen as you can. When you're bending over like this, right? And people are trying to catch their breath. The reason we actually want to stand up is because we're going to open up our chest. We're going to be able to get more oxygen into our lungs, and that's actually going to help with that the oxygen deficit that you're going to be having during your training, but then also replenishing your ATP, you know? So oxygen is still going to be a key factor in that. So making sure, you know, when we do have these high intensity periods where it's going to be more predominantly carbohydrates, then it's lower intensity periods, and then it becomes more into using fat technically as our heart rate goes down. We want to make sure we're trying to regenerate ourselves, and you know, get our oxygen back in our body, have some carbohydrates as a fuel source, or have some Powerade or something, so you're able to repeat that intensity, okay? Because remember, one of the key things here is that fat cannot be used as a fuel source to create as much intensity or regenerate as energy as fast as a carbohydrates as your fuel source, you know? And this is why at that high intensity mark, we can't maintain that forever, just because there's only so many, you know, so much carbohydrates and muscle glycogen we have. And when they start to get depleted, especially our muscle glycogen, we can't keep looking for that as our fuel source, and that's why our intensity does decrease overall, okay? So I hope I'm kind of making that clear here. And just kind of to give you guys this whole idea about, you know, the fitter you get, the more you can use fat as a fuel source. Then you can have your heart rate at a higher rate using fat as a fuel source. You're still going to fatigue, obviously, but you can sustain thresholds longer, you know, and you're not tapping into your glycogen stores as much, which means when you can sustain that effort longer, it's because you're using another fuel source that's just continuous. Because our fat as a fuel source, you know, intramuscular triglycerides, I can't even say that word, intramuscular triglycerides, and also just using like adipose tissue and free fatty acids, using that as a continuous fuel source. That's why, you know, marathon runners can sustain like 80% of their VO2 max for fucking 2 hours at a time. And they're using predominantly fat as their fuel source, you know. Obviously, they are using still a little bit of carbohydrates, and so they are going to be topping up their carbohydrate stores as they're running with, you know, with glucose, so having Powerade and gels and stuff like that to help fuel them. But it's still going to be a good component coming from the fat, you know. And when we go into the oxidative system as itself, so, you know, after we've kind of done it, 400, 800 meter sprint, and we're going into that oxidative system now, you're still going to use, again, carbohydrates and fat as a fuel source, but it's just going to be like more of one or less of one. It's never none of one and most of the other, except when you get to a high amount of, you know, your VO2 max. When you're getting supra maximal levels, you know, going above that VO2 max or above that heart rate max, you're going to be using nearly all carbohydrates, and that's how you'll deplete your carbohydrates or your glycogen so quickly, because you're at that high threshold, right? So if you are an athlete, this is why we talk about training in a faster state too, teaching your body to be able to use more fat as a fuel source. And the more fitter you become, the better your VO2 max, the more you're going to sustain that higher threshold while using fat as a fuel source, and also, again, being able to sustain it for longer periods of time, and that'll make you a better athlete overall. So I hope that clarified things and kind of just, gave you guys a reiteration about how energy systems work. And it's never just one thing. It's always kind of just like a mix of carbohydrates and fats. And basically the way we use ATP as a currency and how it's regenerated is going to be based on our fuel source and the intensity we're able to sustain. So I hope that made sense. If you have any questions, make sure to ask me on Instagram on Tyson the Trainer. I'll speak to you guys next time.